So this is starting on page 29. Do you like always? Do you like always moving around? Lori asked me. Of course, I said. Of course I do, I said. Don't you? Sure, she said. It was late afternoon and we were parked outside of a bar in the Nevada desert. It was called the Bar None Bar. I was 4 and Lori was 7. We were on our way to Las Vegas. Dad had decided it was going to be easier, as he put it, to accumulate the capital necessary to finance the prospector if he hit the casinos for a while. We'd been driving for hours when he saw the Bar None Bar, pulled over in the green caboose. The Blue Goose had died, and we now had another car, a station wagon Dad had named the Green Caboose, and announced that he was going inside for a quick nip. Mom put on some red lipstick and joined him, even though she didn't drink anything stronger than tea. They had been inside for hours. The sun hung high in the sky, and there was not the slightest hint of a breeze. Nothing moved, except some buzzards on the side of the road, pecking over an unrecognizable carcass. Brian was reading a dog-eared comic book. How many places have we lived? I asked Lori. That depends on what you mean by lived, she said. If you spend one night in some town, did you live there? What about 2 nights, or a whole week? I thought, if you unpack all your things, I said. We counted 11 places we had lived. Then we lost track. We couldn't remember the names of some of the towns or what the houses we had lived in looked like. Mostly, I remember the inside of cars. What do you think would happen if we weren't always moving around? I asked. We get caught, Lori said. When Mom and Dad came out of the Bar None Bar, they brought us each a long piece of beef jerky and a candy bar. I ate the jerky first, and by the time I unwrapped my Mounds bar, it had melted into a brown, gooey mess, so I decided to save it until tonight when the desert cold would harden it up again. By then, we had passed through a small town beyond the Bar None Bar. Dad was driving and smoking with one hand and holding a brown bottle of beer with the other. Lori was in the front seat between him and Mom, and Brian, who was in the back with me, was trying to trade me half of his 3 Musketeers for half of my Mounds. Just then, we took a sharp turn over some railroad tracks. The door flew open, and I tumbled out of the car. I rolled several yards along the embankment, and when I came to a stop, I was too shocked to cry, with my breath knocked out and grit pebbles in my eyes and mouth. I lifted my head in time to watch the green caboose get smaller and smaller, and then disappear around a bend. Blood was running down my forehead and flowing out of my nose. My knees and elbows were scraped raw and covered with sand. I was still holding the Mounds bar, but I had smashed it during the fall, tearing the wrapper and squeezing out the white coconut filling, which was also covered with grit. Once I got my breath back, I crawled along the railroad embankment to the road and sat down to wait for Mom and Dad to come back. My whole body felt sore. The sun was small and white and broiling hot. A wind had come up, and it was rolling the dust along the roadside. I waited for what seemed like a long time before I decided it was possible Mom and Dad might not come back for me. They might not notice I was missing. They might decide that it wasn't worth the drive back to retrieve me, and that, like Quixote the cat, I was a bother and a burden they could do without. The little town behind me was quiet, and there were no other cars on the road. I started crying, but that only made me feel more sore. I got up and began to walk back toward the houses, and I then decided that if Mom and Dad did come for me, they wouldn't be able to find me, so I returned to the railroad tracks and sat down again. I was scraping the dried blood off my legs when I looked up and saw the green caboose come back around the bend. It hurtled up the road toward me, getting bigger and bigger, until it screeched to a halt right in front of me. Dad got out of the car, knelt down, and tried to give me a hug. I pulled away from him. I thought you were going to leave me behind, I said. Oh, I'd never do that, he said. Your brother was trying to tell us that you'd fallen out, but he was blubbering so damn hard we couldn't understand a word he was saying. Dad started pulling the pebbles out of my face. Some were buried deep in my skin, so he reached into the glove compartment for a pair of needle-nose pliers. When he plucked all the pebbles from my cheeks and forehead, he took out his handkerchief and tried to stop my nose from bleeding. It was dripping like a broken faucet. Damn, honey, he said. You busted your snot locker pretty good. I started laughing really hard. Snotlocker was the funniest name I'd ever heard for a nose. After Dad cleaned me up, I got back in the car. I told Brian and Lori and Mom about the word, and they all started laughing as hard as me. Snotlocker. It was hilarious. All right, so this section is we lived in Las Vegas. We lived in Las Vegas for about a month in a motel room with dark red walls and 2 narrow beds. We 3 kids slept in one, and Mom and Dad in the other. During the day, During the day, we went to the casinos where Dad said he had a surefire system for beating the house. Brian and I played hide and seek among the clicking slot machines, checking the trays for overlooked quarters, while Dad was winning the money at the blackjack table. I'd stare at the long-legged showgirls when they sashayed across the casino floor with huge feathers on their heads and behinds, sequins sparkling on their bodies and glitter around their eyes. When I tried to imitate their walk, Brian and I looked like an ostrich. At the end of the day, Dad came to get us, his pockets full of money. He bought us cowboy hats and fringed vests, and we ate chicken fried steaks in a restaurant with ice-cold air conditioning and a miniature jukebox at each table. One night, when Dad had made an especially big score, he said it was time to start living like the high rollers we had become. He took us to a restaurant with swinging doors like a saloon. Inside, the walls were decorated with real prospecting tools. A man came with garters on his arms, played a piano, and a woman with gloves that came up past her elbows kept hurrying over to light Dad's cigarettes. Dad told us we were having something special for dessert, a flaming ice cream cake. The waiter wheeled out a tray with a cake on it, and the woman with the gloves lit it with a taper. Everyone stopped eating to watch. The flames had a slow, watery movement, rolling up into the air like ribbons. Everyone started clapping, and Dad jumped up and raised the waiter's hand above his head as if he'd won first prize. A few days later, Mom and Dad went off to the blackjack table, and then almost immediately came looking for us. Dad said one of the dealers had figured out that he had a system and put the word on him. He told us it was time to do the skedaddle. We had to get far away from Las Vegas, Dad said, because the mafia, which owned the casinos, was after him. We headed west through the desert and then the mountains. Mom said we should all live near the Pacific Ocean at least once in our lives, so we kept going all the way to San Francisco. Mom didn't want us staying in one of the tourist trap hotels near Fisherman's Wharf, which she said was inauthentic and cut off from real life on the city, so we found one that had a lot more character in a place called the Tenderloin District. Sailors and women with lots of makeup stayed there too. Dad called it a flop house, but Mom said it was an SRO, and when I asked her what that stood for, she told me the hotel was for special residents only. While Mom and Dad went out looking for an investment money for the prospector, we kids played in the hotel. One day, I found a half-full box of matches. I was thrilled, because I much preferred the wooden matches that came in boxes over the flimsy ones in the cardboard books. I took them upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom. I pulled off some of the toilet paper, lit it, and when it started burning, I threw it down the toilet. I was torturing the fire, giving it life and snuffing it out. Then I got a better idea. I made a pile of toilet paper in the toilet, lit it, and when it started burning, the flame shooting silently up out of the bowl, I flushed it down the toilet. One night, a few days later, I suddenly woke up. The air was hot and stifling. I smelled smoke, and then I saw flames leaping at the open window. At first, I couldn't tell if the fire was inside or outside, but then I saw that one of the curtains, only a few feet from the bed, was ablaze. Mom and Dad were not in the room, and Lori and Brian were still asleep. I tried to scream to warn them, but nothing came out of my throat. I wanted to reach over and shake them awake, but I couldn't move. The fire was growing bigger and stronger and angrier. Just then, the door burst open. Someone was calling our names. It was Dad. Lori and Brian woke up and ran to him, coughing from the smoke. I still couldn't move. I watched the fire, expecting that at any moment my blanket would burst into flames. Dad wrapped the blanket around me and picked me up and ran down the stairs, leading Lori and Brian with one arm, holding me in the other. Dad took us kids across the street to the bar, then went back to help fight the fire. A waitress with red fingernails and a blue-black hair asked if we wanted a Coca-Cola or heck, or even a beer because we'd been through a lot that night. Brian and Lori said yes, please, to Cokes. I asked if I might please have a Shirley Temple, which is what Dad bought me whenever he took me to a bar. And for some reason, the waitress laughed. The people at the bar kept making jokes about women running naked out of the burning hotel, and all I had on was my underwear, so I kept the blanket wrapped tightly around me. After I drank my Shirley Temple, I tried to go back across the street to watch the fire, but the waitress kept me at the bar, so I climbed up on a stool to watch through the window. The fire trucks had arrived. There were flashing lights and men in black rubber coats holding canvas hoses with big jets of water coming out of them. I wondered if the fire had been out to get me. I wondered if all the fire was related, like Dad said all humans were related, if the fire that had burned me that day while I cooked hot dogs was somehow connected to the fire I had flushed down the toilet, and the fire burning at the hotel. I didn't have the answers to those questions, but what I did know was that I lived in a world that at any moment could erupt into fire. It was the sort of knowledge that kept you on your toes. After the hotel burned down, we lived for a few days on the beach. When we put down the back seat of the green caboose, there was room for everyone to sleep, though sometimes someone's feet would be sticking in my face. One night a policeman tapped on our window and said we had to leave. It was illegal to sleep on the beach. He was nice and kept calling his folks and even drew us a map to a place where we could sleep without getting arrested. But after he left, Dad called him a goddamn Gestapo and said that people like that get their jollies from pushing people like us around. Dad was fed up with civilization. He and Mom decided we should move back to the desert and resume our hunt for gold without our starter money. These cities will kill you, he said.